Peace be with you. This week, for the little sermonette, whatever you want to call this, we are going to chat through the third fruit of the Spirit, which is peace. And I'll be honest, I made notes in my journal, and I've been paying attention to this topic all week long, and I came up with something close to like 20, 25 bullet points of things that could be said during this video. But you know, peace is just one of these massive, massive topics. Like, man, what angle should we go in, right? So, man, it was a little chaotic in that sense for me. It was the opposite of peace. What do we say in 10 minutes for you guys to get something worthwhile to hear, to learn, to incorporate into your own life, right? Well, at first I was thinking well, blessed are the peacemakers is what it says. Jesus doesn't say blessed are the war makers, blessed are the peacemakers. But it also doesn't say blessed are the peacekeepers, because you can have a false peace. Like between two groups of people, you can have a false peace where you don't really talk about the issues, right? So we've got something, well, what's Jesus mean here when he says blessed are the peacemakers? Or what do we do with, I don't know, there's all these Old Testament passages where it just reads about war and conflict, and my goodness, this is the holy book of God, and there's so much war? What's going on? And then I had to stop and realize just because it recounts war doesn't mean it's always affirming of war. Is it different? Do you hear what I mean by that? Anyways, so as I was thinking about this term peace, I was like, well, the opposite would be chaos. Maybe some of you feel like your lives are chaotic around you. Maybe some of you feel like the inside of your life is chaotic. That's a different kind of chaos. It's a different kind of not peace, right? Well, the passage that came to my mind is in John's Gospel, which is one of my favorite Gospels, is when Jesus shows up to the apostles, when he was crucified and he was buried, and then they went and hid. I'm going to read that passage for you. We're going to break it down and then see what that has to teach us about the word peace. You ready? So this is from John's Gospel. This is John chapter 20, starting at verse 19, just real quick. When it was the evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." Let's pause there. Okay, so the apostles are locked in a room for fear of the Jewish leaders that just lynched Jesus outside of the city of Jerusalem on the mount called Golgotha. So here they are, terrified and afraid. They've locked themselves into a room for the whole weekend because they have no expectations. All of the expectations of what they thought would have happened were completely dashed to pieces, and they were left with not only an external chaos, but an internal one. But what does God do? Well, he does this. Ready? He walks back onto the scene. And it's fascinating. The first thing that God does is he doesn't berate them or remind them that they were failures for having bailed on him while he was being crucified. The first thing God does, the first word that he says is, "Peace be with you." What is up with that? That God didn't feel the need to remind people of their mistakes, even mistakes that cost him his life. Like, what is going on? And of course then, that little pericope, that means a short passage, when he shows up and instead of berating them and reminding them of their mistakes and their failures, he says, "Peace," of course they would rejoice. Because peacemaking is always about taking two entities that are apart and bringing them back together. Literally, religio. Religion means to religament things. That's one interpretation of the word religion. Now, let's just talk about the word peace real quick, all right? Well, at least for the Jewish disciples, right, in this passage, they would have heard the word peace and probably had a few nuances that came to them, all right? So, in a Hebrew mindset, when they hear the word peace, it probably has tonations of the word shalom. Maybe you've heard this. Shalom is often a hello or a goodbye, but it really means peace. It can even mean harmony. It means right relationship, right? And so, like a symphony. Oh, let's do like a harmony. When peace happens, it's like things are harmonic again. They're no longer bashing against each other like they sound really bad. I don't know about you, but I've had a good opportunity to go to the Philadelphia Orchestra. And I once had prime seating kind of in the pit. I was with some people that are really big donors, and so we got real dressed up. And I was so close to the Philadelphia Orchestra that I could actually see the music notes on their sheet music. I'm like in this little tier right above the pit, and I'm looking up at all of the seats up that way. I'm like, this is amazing. I could actually see that's an F sharp, right? But when one instrument isn't playing the right notes, it's no longer a symphony. It's what we call a cacophony, where there's things that are just clashing. Well, peace, shalom, means things aren't clashing. They're instead working together. They're not all playing the same notes, though, because if you have a whole orchestra and they're all playing the same exact notes, that's not quite as symphonic as when they're all playing their individual notes that work together to create something beautiful that rises above just any one instrument. So shalom happens in the orchestra. Shalom can happen in your life when the notes, the melody of your life and inside of yourself work together rather than clashing. Now that's maybe a Jewish and musical perspective, but I was really fascinated. Last night, I went into a Wikipedia spiral, and I looked up the Greek word for peace, and it's Eirene. And Professor Dr. Debbie Watson could probably correct me for mispronouncing that. But Eirene is where we get the name Eirene or Renee, and that means peace as well. Well, in Greek mythology, Eirene was the goddess of peace. And so the word peace to people in a Greek-speaking culture, there would have been echoes of the Greek goddess. I'm not saying that the apostles believed in her, but there's a famous statue of Eirene, and she's holding a baby. And the baby's name is Plutus, who was the god of plenty. Because when there's peace, there's often plenty for everyone. It's like plenty is the child or the offspring of peace. But when there's war, then there's conflict, and then there's scarcity. And people start fighting over what little resources there are in life. So I don't know about you. Have you ever had conflicts with other people or even within yourself that led you to feel like life is very scarce? There's not a whole lot to go around. Well, the good news of the gospel is that when God shows up on the scene, God doesn't show up and say chaos. He doesn't show up and say war. He doesn't show up and say scarcity is the law of the land. Those principles are inherently anti-Christian, anti-Christ. When God shows up onto the scene, he says peace. And then that peace can lead to rejoicing. That peace can lead to us saying, you know what, there is plenty. When God shows up on the scene and he says peace, rather than showing us or reminding us of all of our faults and failures and mistakes, and instead just says, peace be with you. It's actually breaking something when God does that. because you and I and everyone else, we have a bend where we want to hold people desperately accountable to all the ways that we've made mistakes and messes of our lives. But when God shows up, he prefers to say, Shalom, Eirene. God, when he comes onto the scene, likes to take things that are apart and put them back together, not show up on the scene and remind things that are apart why they should stay apart. That's not godly at all. Now, what I would love to do is really just finish with a famous quote. One of my favorite influences is a 16th century Spanish poet and mystic. You may have heard of her, Teresa of Avila. Now, she was a groundbreaking person. She's probably one of my favorite female theologians and female spirituality teachers. She says this: may today there be peace within. May you trust God that you are exactly where you are meant to be. May you not forget the infinite possibilities that are born of faith. May you use those gifts that you have received and pass on the love that has been given to you. May you be content knowing that you are a child of God. Let this presence of God settle into your bones. I love that line, right? And allow your soul the freedom to sing and to dance, to praise and to love. It is there for each and every one of us, the presence of peace. When I think about the Christian narrative, when I think about what I understand the gospel to be, as I've been reading the scriptures, as I've been engaging Christian theology and spirituality, my understanding of God has always blossomed, and I hope it keeps continuing to blossom. And the way it can blossom for you is by reminding yourself that when the world around you is absolutely chaotic, when the world within you feels like a cacophony rather than a symphony, when it feels as though things have been separated and divided, that's the perfect time to pray that God shows up and says, peace be with you. May you this week, and I, remember to pray earnestly for the presence of God to show up into the chaos of our lives and show us how to be peacemakers, show us how to, sing, dance, praise, and love, like Teresa of Avila said. So wonderful. Thank you so much. Grace and peace to all of you. Be well.